Hello and a warm welcome from me, Olivia Swash, here to guide you through the next half hour of all things North East arts and culture. In a world of digital photos and camera phones, photography processing could be considered a little old-fashioned. But Andy Martin has revived the Victorian method of tintype photography, which dates back to 1851. I visited him in Sunderland to find out about the process. So Andy, tell us about how you started out in photography.
So yeah, I've been sort of taking film photography for the last sort of 10, 15 years or so. Mostly night photography with kind of old cameras and film, really long exposures. Then about 5 years ago, I was kind of really sort of interested in the early processes, and wet plate photography was kind of the most sort of accessible of those. So I got in touch with a chap in London who he was one of the first people to kind of start doing the technique in the 90s, I think. And I went out to London for the day and showed us the process and sent us on my way with some chemical supplies and some photographic manuals from the 1850s, and here I am.
So tell us about the process of actually, creating the photo from.
Yeah,
how does it start out?
Yeah, basically it was invented in 1851 by an Englishman called Frederick Scott Archer, and basically you pour a chemical called collodion onto a glass or metal plate, and while it's still wet, you put it in a bath of silver nitrate, and that makes it sort of light sensitive. So it's kind of like a sheet of film. If don't know, some of the older viewers might know what I'm talking about. And then basically you load it in your camera or your dark slide, take your photograph, and then you go back to the darkroom to develop it. And this is all in the space of 20 minutes max, really, because if the plate dries, it just won't work. So it's especially in the summer when the temperatures are a lot warmer. You get issues with your plates drying. So it's kind of it's a bit of a challenge. Each time there's so many variables. It's quite easy for something to go wrong.
So it's almost like a chemical process, as well as being quite artistic. It's kind of, you've got to get it exactly right.
Yeah, essentially. For me, and I think a lot of people doing this, the hardest bit is getting your chemicals kind of, the right sort of, mixed correctly and sort of maintaining them. Because as I say, if one thing's out, then your plate will be sort of not up to scratch. So it's the photography bit's pretty easy comparatively. It's more chemistry, and I was never that into science at school, so I've had to learn fast.
Yeah. So it's quite niche, isn't it? So apart from it being quite easily accessible and easy to maybe do, what about it? What about the style of it did you like?
Yeah, I think it's kind of there's a bit of a magic in the technique. You're pouring chemicals, and you're seeing these images appear in the darkroom, and it's, and the images themselves, especially the portraits, they're really quite intense, so I quite like the sort of, I don't know, it's just different to digital photography. There's so much out there, people with their phones and Instagram, that it's just nice to do something a bit different.
Yeah, and to me it was almost like kind of early Polaroids. Was that the point of it?
I guess in a way, yeah. It's people are always surprised by the quick turnaround. You can sort of produce an image in 10 minutes or less sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's, and each one's a one-off. You can't really sort of replicate. And I think that's the beauty of it. It's these sort of handcrafted images that be around in 100, 200 years time, hopefully.
And you've done quite a few portraits of people around the North East. So how did that come about?
Yeah, I think initially it was just sort of finding people to photograph. So you start with your friends and family, and then you sort of see who's out there. And there's the North East, obviously there's a lot of interest in people. So, and then people kind of ask me to take a photograph, like bands and sort of performers. So it just kind of sort of escalated from there, really, I think. Well, I'm keen to do a sort of project around kind of Northeast people and Sunderland people, maybe, something to reflect Sunderland's, industrial heritage, see where that leads
us.
So
maybe getting the community involved in...
Yeah, I think so, it's, people really respond well to these images, so I think it should should be good to see.
And what about the cameras that you actually use? I mean, you said that you kind of restored a couple.
Yeah, I mean it varies. I use cameras from the 1940s to shoot smaller plates, which it does the job. It's the same principle, and this is from sort of the 1880s, which will shoot like a whole plate, which is a bit more of a challenge. Obviously, the bigger the plate.
So you mentioned that you did some night photography. So what did that involve?
Yeah, I mean, well, basically just staying up late and and wandering around some unsavoury parts of Sunderland. I've always been fascinated with sort of Hendon and the East End of Sunderland, so a lot of the work was kind of focused around there.